I think it would be better if you didn't come to the wedding, Mom. Those words, delivered with clinical detachment over a phone call that lasted exactly 6 minutes and 22 seconds, shattered my world on a perfect April morning. I was standing in my garden, pruning roses I'd hoped would make a lovely corsage for my only son's wedding, when Ryan's name flashed across my phone screen. "What do you mean?" I asked, my gardening shears frozen mid-cut, a thorn digging into my thumb without me even noticing the pain. "Olivia's family. They're different from us. Old Boston money. Connections everywhere." Ryan's voice had that slightly higher pitch it always gets when he's repeating someone else's words. "The guest list has been carefully curated, and we need to maintain a certain atmosphere." "Atmosphere," I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. The same tongue that had sung him lullabies through fevers, that had bitten back harsh words when his father walked out, that had whispered encouragements through college applications and heartbreaks. "It's nothing personal, Mom. It's just that you might feel out of place. You wouldn't know anybody. You might be uncomfortable." But we both knew what he really meant. I would make him uncomfortable. I, Martha Sullivan, with my sensible shoes and second-hand clothes, would embarrass my son in front of his fiancé's blue-blooded family and friends. "I see," I said. Because what else could I say? That I had already bought a dress I couldn't afford? That I had practiced dancing so I wouldn't stumble during the mother-son dance? That I had been saving for this day since he was a boy, tucking away dollars from my librarian's salary, imagining this milestone we would share? "It's for the best," Ryan continued, his voice softening into the tone he used when closing a business deal. "We'll have a private celebration later, just the three of us. Something intimate." My garden suddenly seemed too bright, the colors too harsh. The Portsmouth morning, usually so comforting with its salt breeze and distant foghorns, felt alien. "Ryan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've been at every important moment of your life. Your first steps, your graduation, the day you got that job in Boston. I was there when no one else was." Silence stretched between us, spanning the 62 miles from my modest colonial in Portsmouth to his luxury condo in Boston. "That's not fair, Mom." His voice hardened. "The Wall Street finance executive now, not my boy. This is different. This is about my future, my connections. Olivia's father is a Cabot, for God's sake." I closed my eyes, seeing not the successful 33-year-old man he'd become, but the 3-year-old boy who'd asked me every night for a year when Daddy was coming home. "And I'm just a small-town librarian," I completed his thought. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Another silence, this one heavier than the last. "Look, it's already decided. The invitations went out weeks ago." That was the moment I realized he'd never intended to invite me at all. This call wasn't a change of plans. It was a courtesy notification, a box checked off his wedding planning spreadsheet. "Call Mother wedding exclusion." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Not really. How could any mother understand being erased from her child's most important day? "Thanks for understanding, Mom. I knew you would." Relief flooded his voice. "Olivia's already stressed enough with all the arrangements." "Of course," I murmured, as if agreeing that my absence would contribute to this perfection. "I should go. We have the menu tasting in 30 minutes, and Boston traffic is already a nightmare." "Ryan," I said quickly, before he could hang up, "I love you. I've always loved you, more than anything in this world." A pause, then, hurriedly, "Love you too, Mom. Talk soon." The call ended. 6 minutes and 22 seconds to uninvite a mother from her only child's wedding. Less time than it takes to boil an egg. Before I continue, don't forget to join our group, where you'll have access to exclusive stories, without ads directly on your cell phone, and you don't even need internet to watch. Just go to the first pinned comment. I stood in my garden, surrounded by half-pruned roses, and felt something inside me crack open. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for years, as Ryan climbed social ladders that took him further from me. No, this was different. This was the protective shell I had built around a lifetime of truths unsaid. I looked down at my hands. Librarian's hands, with paper cuts and arthritis, hands that had shelved thousands of books and wiped away countless tears. These hands had also hidden away the documents, the evidence, the past Ryan had spent his adulthood out running. I carefully placed my gardening shears on the stone bench, went inside my house, and climbed the stairs to the attic. The cedar chest in the corner had remained untouched for almost 20 years. I knelt before it, my knees protesting, and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, beneath yellowed baby clothes and school reports, lay a sealed manila envelope. I had promised myself I would never open it, never use what it contained. I had kept that promise through financial hardships, through Ryan's increasingly dismissive treatment, through holidays spent alone. But as I held that envelope, I wondered, had my protection made him the kind of man who would ban his mother from his wedding? Had my sacrifices created not the son I'd hoped for, but something else entirely? What I didn't know then was that truth has a way of surfacing on its own, like a body in water, and sometimes it washes up right in your own front yard, which is exactly where I would find my son's tearful bride the morning after their wedding, her designer dress muddied and torn, her carefully curated life unraveling, and 5 words on her lips that would change everything. "I think I married a monster." I didn't watch the wedding live stream. I could have. Olivia's cousin had posted the link on Instagram, broadcasting the event to those deemed worthy of virtual but not physical attendance. Instead, I spent that Saturday deadheading my roses, reorganizing my modest book collection, and pretending that the hollow ache in my chest was just spring allergies. Around midnight, I made tea and allowed myself one small indulgence. I checked social media for a glimpse of what I had missed. The photos were exactly what I'd expected. Ryan handsome in his tuxedo, Olivia ethereal in a gown that probably cost more than my annual pension. The Bristol Yacht Club gleaming with fairy lights, champagne towers and ice sculptures. Boston's elite raising crystal flutes to the perfect union of capital and ambition. I went to bed telling myself that my absence was barely noticed amid such splendor. The knock came at 7:18 the next morning. Not a polite, measured knock, but an urgent, desperate pounding that jolted me from sleep. I threw on my robe and hurried downstairs, my heart racing with the sudden certainty that something terrible had happened to Ryan. What I found on my porch defied all expectation. Olivia Thompson Sullivan, as of yesterday my daughter-in-law, stood swaying slightly in the pale morning light. Her wedding dress, which had cost more than my car, was torn at the hem and stained with what looked like mud and grass. One strap hung broken over her shoulder. Her carefully styled blonde hair had partially collapsed, and mascara tracked down her cheeks in black rivers. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her voice hoarse. I didn't know where else to go. I had met Olivia exactly twice before this moment. Once at an awkward dinner where Ryan had spent the evening explaining me away. Mom's just a simple woman with simple tastes. And once at their engagement party, where I'd been seated at a distant table with elderly relatives no one wanted to talk to. "Olivia, what happened? Is Ryan—" "Ryan is fine," she cut me off, her voice hardening momentarily before crumbling again. "At least, physically fine." I ushered her inside, noting how she stumbled slightly. The sweet scent of champagne mingled with her expensive perfume. "I'll make coffee," I said, guiding her to my kitchen table. A solid oak piece that had witnessed 30 years of breakfasts, homework sessions, and late-night confidences, with a son who now found me embarrassing. Olivia collapsed into a chair, incongruously elegant despite her dishevelment, like a Degas ballerina in a laundromat. She stared at her manicured hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I ran away," she whispered, "from my own wedding night." I placed a steaming mug in front of her, noting the tremble in her fingers as she reached for it. "Should I call Ryan? He must be worried sick." Her laugh was bitter, almost alarming in its sharpness. "Oh, he's not worried about me. He's worried about himself. Always himself." Something in her tone, the absolute certainty, the unveiled contempt, made me pause. This wasn't just a newlywed spat or wedding night jitters. "Olivia, what happened after the wedding?" She took a long sip of coffee, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, they were clearer, more focused. "We were at the hotel suite, the presidential at the Four Seasons. Everything was perfect. Champagne, roses, the works." She twisted the new platinum band on her finger. "Ryan got a call. He said it was work. Stepped onto the balcony. I thought nothing of it. He's always working." She paused, her gaze now fixed on something visible only to her. I wanted to bring him more champagne, surprise him. But when I got to the balcony door, I heard him talking about my father's accounts, about moving money offshore before the old man noticed. My heart sank, a heavy stone dropping through water. "Maybe it was a work call," I suggested weakly. "Ryan handles many high-profile accounts," he said, and I quote, "Once I have control of the family trust, we can liquidate the majority holdings. The old man's too proud to admit he's been swindled, especially by his son-in-law." Her voice was stronger now, anger burning off the alcohol haze. Then he laughed and said, "She doesn't suspect a thing." I couldn't speak, couldn't find words to defend or explain. I pretended I hadn't heard anything when he came back in. We consummated the marriage." Her clinical tone couldn't hide her revulsion. "He fell asleep. I waited an hour, then took his phone. From somewhere within the folds of her ruined dress, she produced Ryan's smartphone. The passcode was my birthday. How romantic." Her laugh was hollow. "I found everything. Emails, transfers, plans to systematically drain my family's foundation once he had legal access through me." "Olivia," I managed, "this is very serious. If what you're saying is true, I have the proof right here." She cut me off, holding up the phone. "The question is, Mrs. Sullivan, did you know? Did you know what kind of man your son really is?" The question hung between us, a blade suspended by the thinnest thread. And in that moment, looking into her devastated face, I made a decision. After 30 years of protecting Ryan from the truth, perhaps it was time for truth to protect others from Ryan. "I think," I said carefully, "we need to talk about his father." "His father?" Olivia's puffy eyes narrowed slightly. "Ryan told me his father died in a car accident when he was young." A small, sad smile crossed my lips. "Is that what he told you? I suppose it's more palatable than the truth." I rose from the table, my joints stiff from the morning chill. Through the kitchen window, I could see my garden coming alive with birdsong and dew-sparkled webs. How ordinary this day looked, even as it balanced on the edge of catastrophe. Ryan's father, Daniel, is very much alive as far as I know, I said, pouring more coffee for us both. He didn't die heroically. He disappeared deliberately one Tuesday morning in October, after cleaning out our joint bank account and maxing out all our credit cards. Olivia's face registered shock, then something darker. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition of a pattern repeating itself. Ryan was 3, I continued. Old enough to miss his father terribly, but too young to understand why he'd left. For years, he'd ask when Daddy was coming home. Eventually, he stopped asking. But why would Ryan lie about something like that? I settled back into my chair. Shame, perhaps. Or maybe the reality of being abandoned was too painful to acknowledge. It's easier to have a dead hero for a father than a living criminal. Criminal? Olivia leaned forward. Daniel worked in finance too. Not as successfully as Ryan, but with the same flexible approach to ethics. I cupped my mug, drawing warmth from it. 3 weeks after he disappeared, 2 FBI agents showed up at our door. Turned out Daniel had been running a Ponzi scheme through his investment firm. When it started collapsing, he ran. Olivia's hand moved unconsciously to the phone on the table. And you didn't know? That's the question that haunted me for years, I admitted. Should I have known? Were there signs I missed? I was working 2 jobs, days at the library, nights waiting tables. Daniel handled all our finances. He was charming, persuasive. Everyone trusted him. I looked directly at her. Everyone. Recognition flashed in her eyes again. She saw the parallel. I didn't need to draw it for her. The FBI investigated me too, of course. They thought I might be hiding money for him, might be his accomplice. I laughed softly. The irony was, I was completely broke, left with a 3-year-old, no savings, and a mountain of debt that wasn't even mine. What happened to him? To Daniel? He made it to Brazil, non-extraditable at the time. The authorities tracked him that far, then lost him. I took a sip of coffee. I received divorce papers from Rio de Janeiro 6 months later. Never heard from him again. Olivia stared at the phone, then back at me. And you think Ryan? You think he's like his father? The question I'd spent 30 years avoiding. The fear that had kept me awake through countless nights as I watched Ryan grow. Watched him develop his father's charm, his father's ambition, his father's casual relationship with the truth. I don't know, I said honestly. I tried so hard to raise him differently, to teach him about integrity, about responsibility. But DNA is powerful, and so are absent fathers. They become myths children create in their own image. Olivia was silent for a long moment. When I first met Ryan, he told me he'd built his fortune from nothing. Self-made man was the exact phrase. Said he put himself through college with scholarships and hard work. I couldn't stop the small, sad laugh that escaped me. I remortgaged this house twice to pay for his education. Worked overtime for years. He had a small scholarship, yes, but... I shook my head. Ryan has always been gifted at revising history to suit his preferred narrative, just like he revised his father's story. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. Just like that. Outside, the morning had brightened into full sunshine. In Boston, people would be waking in their hotel rooms, nursing hangovers from the wedding of the season. Ryan would be waking too, discovering his bride and his phone missing. What story would he create to explain that absence? There's something else, I said, standing again. Something I've kept for years. It may help you understand, or at least confirm what you suspect. What is it? Evidence. Documents the FBI didn't find. Papers that implicated not just Daniel, but some of his associates. I found them hidden in our basement after the investigation closed. I moved toward the stairs. I kept them to protect Ryan. I was afraid that if the case were ever reopened, suspicion might fall on him simply for being Daniel's son. Where are these documents now? In the attic. I've never shown them to anyone. I paused at the kitchen doorway. But before I get them, I need to ask you something, Olivia. What do you intend to do with what you found on Ryan's phone? Her face hardened, the last traces of the champagne haze burning away in the cold light of betrayal. My father trusted him, welcomed him into our family, was going to make him a partner. Her voice shook with fury. If Ryan is stealing from my family, from our foundation that helps thousands of people, I won't protect him. I can't. I nodded slowly. Then it's time you saw what I've been hiding. Because if Ryan is truly his father's son, then I've been protecting the wrong person all these years. As I turned to climb the stairs, Olivia's voice stopped me. Mrs. Sullivan, why did you keep these documents? Why not destroy them? I looked back at her, this beautiful broken bride in my kitchen, and told her the truth. Because deep down, I always feared this day would come. The attic stairs creaked under my weight. Each step a reluctant surrender of secrets, long preserved in darkness and dust. Olivia followed behind me, her designer wedding dress absurdly out of place among the cobwebs and forgotten Christmas decorations. Watch your step, I cautioned. And your dress. The dress is already ruined, she replied flatly. Like the marriage it represents. The cedar chest waited in the corner, just as it had yesterday when I'd stood over it, contemplating truths better left buried. Now, with Ryan's betrayal laid bare through his own digital carelessness, such hesitation seemed pointless. I knelt before the chest, my knees protesting against the hard wooden floor. The brass hinges groaned as I lifted the lid. a sound like old pain being disturbed after years of dormancy. I haven't opened this in almost 20 years, I explained, carefully moving aside baby blankets, school projects, and the tiny bronzed shoes that had once held Ryan's first steps, not since Ryan left for college. Beneath these artifacts of motherhood lay the manila envelope, sealed with a red string wound in a pattern that hadn't been disturbed since I'd last secured it. I lifted it reverently, feeling its weight, the physical burden of evidence I'd carried emotionally for decades. What exactly is in there? Olivia asked, sinking awkwardly to the floor beside me, her ruined gown pooling around her like spilled cream. Financial records, client lists, offshore account numbers. I traced the edge of the envelope with my finger. Daniel was meticulous about documentation, just not about ethics. When the FBI raided our house, they missed this. It was hidden in a compartment beneath Ryan's toy chest. And you kept it all these years? Why not turn it in? I looked at her directly. Because I was afraid. Afraid they might think I was complicit. Afraid they'd take Ryan away from me while they investigated. Afraid of poverty, of shame, of what people would think. The justifications sounded hollow now, even to me. Fear had been my companion for so long that I'd mistaken it for prudence. But mostly, I continued softly, I kept it because it was the only leverage I had if Daniel ever returned, demanding custody of Ryan or threatening us. It was my insurance policy. I placed the envelope on the chest and carefully unwound the red string. The paper had yellowed with age, but the contents remained pristine, sheet after sheet of financial documents, client names, transaction records, and photographs. Daniel with men in expensive suits, shaking hands, raising glasses, signing papers. Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she examined a page of figures. These are exactly like the spreadsheets on Ryan's phone, the same structure, the same method of obscuring the transfers. She looked up at me, her face pale. It's like he used his father's playbook. Perhaps he did, I said quietly. Ryan was always searching for information about his father. When he was 12, I found him going through my personal papers. In high school, he tried to contact Daniel's old associates. I always thought it was just a son searching for his father, but maybe he was searching for something else. A method, a mentor. Olivia's voice hardened. A role model for the man he wanted to become. We sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the physical evidence of 2 generations of deception. Did you ever wonder, Olivia asked suddenly, if Ryan found these documents before you showed them to him? If he discovered his father's methods on his own? The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course I had wondered. During sleepless nights when Ryan was a teenager and I'd hear him moving around the house at odd hours. When money occasionally went missing from my purse, always with a plausible explanation later. When he'd come home from college with gifts too expensive for a scholarship student. I chose not to know, I admitted. I chose to believe the best. That's what mothers do. Not all mothers, Olivia said, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. Your mother. My mother sees everything and says nothing as long as appearances are maintained. Olivia's laugh was brittle. She probably suspects Ryan isn't what he seems, but as long as he plays his role publicly, she'll ignore whatever happens behind closed doors. Another revelation slid into place. Why Ryan had been so determined to keep me away from the wedding. Not just social embarrassment, but fear. Fear that I might recognize in his new in-laws the same willful blindness I had practiced myself. Fear that I might see through the facade he'd constructed. My phone buzzed from my pocket. A text message. Then another, and another. I pulled it out to find Ryan's name on the screen, messages arriving in rapid succession. Mom, have you heard from Olivia? She's missing. We had a fight. If she contacts you, tell her I'm worried sick. Please call me ASAP. Olivia leaned over to read the messages, her face twisting with disgust. A fight? Is that what he's calling it? Me discovering his plan to steal my family's money? I stared at the phone as another message appeared. She took my phone. She's not thinking clearly. She might say things that aren't true. The preemptive defense, just like his father, already crafting the narrative before the accusations could even be made. What are you going to do? I asked Olivia, setting my phone aside. She gathered the documents, arranging them carefully beside Ryan's phone. I'm going to call my father, not my mother. She'd try to sweep it under the rug. But my father, he'll want to know the truth no matter how painful. And then I'll contact the authorities. Her voice was steadier now, resolution replacing shock. The foundation helps thousands of people, Mrs. Sullivan. Children with cancer, domestic violence survivors. If Ryan has been siphoning funds, she didn't need to finish. We both understood the magnitude of such a betrayal. Not just of her, but of the vulnerable people who depended on that money. My phone buzzed again. Ryan, calling now. I silenced it. He'll come here, I said with certainty. When you don't answer, when I don't answer, this will be the first place he looks. Olivia's eyes met mine, a question in them. What will you tell him? She asked. If he comes? The weight of 30 years of protection, of excuses, of looking the other way pressed down on me. I glanced at the evidence spread before us, his father's crimes, and, if Olivia was right, his own. I think, I said slowly, it's time I stopped telling Ryan anything. It's time I started telling the truth instead. Outside, a car door slammed. We both turned toward the small attic window where a sleek black BMW had pulled into my driveway. Ryan had arrived. "He's here," Olivia whispered, her face draining of color. That was fast. I moved to the attic window. Ryan was striding up my garden path, still in his wedding suit, though the tie was gone and the collar unbuttoned. His usual smooth confidence had been replaced by something frantic, almost feral in his movements. "We need to decide quickly," I said, turning back to Olivia. "What do you want to do?" She gathered the documents with trembling hands. "I'm not ready to face him. Not yet." I nodded, already calculating. "There's a guest room at the end of the hall. Go there, lock the door. I'll handle Ryan." "Mrs. Sullivan?" Olivia hesitated, clutching the envelope and phone to her chest. "Martha," I corrected gently. "I think we're beyond formalities now." "Martha," she repeated. "What will you tell him?" The doorbell rang, an intrusive chime that made us both flinch. "I'll tell him what he needs to hear," I answered. "Not what he wants to hear. There's a difference." Olivia slipped into the guest room as I descended the stairs, smoothing my robe and running a hand through my sleep-tousled hair. When I opened the front door, Ryan burst in without waiting for an invitation. "Mom," he said, eyes wild as they scanned the living room. "Is she here? Is Olivia here?" I closed the door deliberately, taking my time. "Good morning to you too, Ryan. Congratulations on your wedding. I saw the photos online. It looked lovely." His impatience was palpable, rolling off him in waves. "Mom, please, this is serious. Olivia's missing. We had a fight and she took off. She took my phone." "A fight? On your wedding night?" I moved past him to the kitchen. "Coffee? I don't want coffee." He followed, his expensive shoes squeaking on my linoleum floor. "I want to know if you've seen my wife." Wife. The word hung between us, laden with implications. This man who had deemed me unworthy to attend his wedding now expected me to help solve his marital problems not 12 hours later. "Sit down, Ryan," I said, my voice firmer than he was accustomed to hearing from me. Something in my tone must have registered, because he blinked, then sank into a kitchen chair. "What happened?" I asked, pouring coffee for myself, deliberately not offering him any. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my chest ache. "It's complicated. Olivia, she misunderstood something. Got upset over nothing." "Nothing?" "A work call. She overheard something and jumped to conclusions." He leaned forward, earnest and persuasive, the same expression he'd worn when explaining missing money or broken curfews as a teenager. "You know how high-strung these society women can be." I sipped my coffee, studying him over the rim. "My son. My beautiful, talented, morally compromised son. What exactly did she misunderstand, Ryan?" He hesitated, calculating his response. "Just some investment talk, portfolio management, nothing interesting." "For her family's foundation?" I pressed. A flicker of something, surprise, wariness, crossed his face. "She talked to you already. She's here, isn't she?" I set my mug down carefully. What would Olivia say if I asked her what she overheard? What would she tell me about these investments? "Mom, you don't understand finance. You never have." His tone was dismissive, designed to make me retreat, as I always had when he used it. "This is between me and my wife." "Your wife?" I repeated. "The same wife you married yesterday in a ceremony your own mother wasn't permitted to attend? That wife?" A flash of irritation. "Are we really doing this now? I've already explained." "You explained that I would embarrass you," I cut in. "That I wouldn't fit in with the Cabots and their circle. That my presence would disrupt the atmosphere you were trying to create." "Mom!" "And now here you are, in my embarrassing little house, asking for my help because your plan has gone wrong." I leaned forward. "What was the plan, Ryan? The one Olivia wasn't supposed to discover?" His face hardened, Daniel's features suddenly dominant in his expression. "I don't know what she's told you, but she's upset and confused. You can't believe—" "I've believed in you your entire life," I interrupted. "I believed in you when you stole money from my purse in high school and blamed the cleaning lady. I believed in you when you came home from college with a watch that cost more than my monthly salary and claimed it was a gift from a friend. I believed in you when you said your father was dead rather than a fugitive fraudster who abandoned us." He flinched, as if I'd struck him. "That's different, is it? Or is it all part of the same pattern? The same person you've been becoming your entire adult life?" Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this. If Olivia contacts you, tell her to call me. We need to talk. Like you're talking to me now? Deflecting? Minimizing? Creating an alternate reality where you're the victim instead of the perpetrator?" "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped. But I saw it in his eyes, the momentary flash of panic, the realization that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "I think I do," I said quietly. "I think I've always known, deep down. I just couldn't bear to admit it. Couldn't bear to see Daniel looking back at me through your eyes." Ryan went very still. "This has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with him." I stood too, facing my son across the kitchen table, the same table where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped with his homework. "He's been the ghost in our lives for 30 years, the model you studied more closely than you'll ever admit. You're being ridiculous." But his voice had lost its conviction. "Am I? Then explain to me why your investment strategy for the Cabot Foundation looks exactly like your father's Ponzi scheme from 1989. The color drained from Ryan's face. What are you talking about? The documents, Ryan. The ones the FBI never found. The ones I kept hidden all these years to protect you. I watched his expression shift from confusion to shock to a terrible understanding. Did you think I didn't know they existed? Or did you find them years ago and decide to follow in your father's footsteps after all? For a moment, I glimpsed the child beneath the man, the lost little boy searching for his father's approval, even in absence. Then the mask slammed back into place. I want to see my wife, he demanded. I know she's here. Your wife doesn't want to see you. I moved between Ryan and the doorway, and for the first time in 30 years, I'm not going to smooth things over for you. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm not going to protect you from the consequences of your actions. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Get out of my way, Mom. No. I stood my ground, this aging librarian in a faded robe, facing down the son who towered over her. Not this time. You don't understand what you're doing, Ryan hissed, his handsome face contorted with an emotion I'd rarely seen him display so nakedly. Fear. I understand perfectly, I replied, maintaining my position in the doorway. For the first time in decades, I truly understand. His laugh was sharp, brittle. You think you know what's on my phone? You think Olivia, drunk, hysterical Olivia, gave you the full picture? I think I've spent 30 years ignoring partial pictures because they were too painful to examine closely. I crossed my arms. That ends today. Ryan's strategy shifted. I could see it happening. The anger drained from his face, replaced by the earnest, boyish expression he'd used since childhood to disarm me. Mom, please, I know I hurt you with the wedding. I know that was wrong. He took a step toward me, hands spread in supplication. But this situation with Olivia is complicated. Business is complicated. If you'd just let me explain to her. The way you explained why I couldn't attend your wedding. The way you explained your father's absence all these years. The way you're trying to explain away whatever Olivia found on your phone. I shook my head. No more explanations, Ryan. No more revisions of reality. He stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. This mother who had always yielded, always believed, always made way for his version of events, suddenly standing firm. What do you want? He asked finally, voice low. I want what I've always wanted. For you to be the man I tried to raise, not the man your father was. Pain flashed across his features, quickly suppressed. I am nothing like him. Prove it, I challenged softly. If Olivia's accusations are false, if the documents on your phone are innocent, then you have nothing to fear from transparency. Call her father yourself. Explain these investments in clear terms. Open your accounts to scrutiny. Ryan's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said, disappointment a physical ache in my chest. You have no idea what it's been like, he said suddenly, his voice cracking slightly. Growing up with nothing while watching classmates take everything for granted. Scratching and clawing for every opportunity while others had paths paved for them. We didn't have nothing, Ryan. We had each other. We had a home. We had enough. Enough? He gestured dismissively at my modest kitchen. This was enough for you. It was never enough for me. The words stung, but I refused to show it. And now? Is being married to a Cabot enough? Is access to her family's fortune enough? Or will it never be enough because what you're really chasing isn't money at all? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. You're chasing him, I continued softly. The ghost of a father who chose money over family, who valued appearance over substance, who left without looking back. Stop, Ryan whispered. You've spent your life simultaneously running from him and toward him, denying his existence while recreating his patterns. I said stop! He slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee mugs jump. The sound reverberated through the kitchen, followed by a tense silence. We stared at each other across the battlefield of my kitchen, mother and son, locked in a confrontation 30 years in the making. She'll ruin me, he said finally, his voice barely audible. If she takes what she found to her father, to the authorities, everything I've built will collapse. The admission hung in the air between us, not quite a confession, but close enough. Perhaps it should, I replied gently. Perhaps it needs to collapse so something more honest can be built in its place. He looked at me with genuine bewilderment, as if I'd suggested the sun should rise in the west. You're my mother. You're supposed to protect me. I am protecting you, Ryan, from becoming someone beyond redemption. From going so far down your father's path that you can never find your way back. I took a deep breath. The best protection I can offer you now is the truth. He moved suddenly, pushing past me into the hallway. Olivia, he shouted, his voice echoing up the stairwell. I know you're here. We need to talk. I followed him into the hallway. Ryan, stop this. He was already halfway up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Olivia, whatever my mother told you, whatever you think you know, it's not the whole story. I hurried after him, my heart pounding with exertion and fear. He reached the upstairs hallway and tried the guest room door, finding it locked. Olivia, open the door. He rattled the handle violently. Ryan, that's enough. I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off with such force that I stumbled against the wall. The moment crystallized between us. My son, wild-eyed and desperate, looming over me as I braced myself against the wallpaper I'd hung myself 20 years ago. For a heartbeat, I saw genuine shock in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd just done. Before either of us could speak, the guest room door opened. Olivia stood in the doorway, Ryan's phone in one hand, the manila envelope in the other. Her ruined wedding dress had been replaced with an old sweater and pair of jeans I kept in the guest room, items left behind by a library colleague who had stayed with me during a snowstorm last winter. The borrowed clothes hung loosely on her slender frame, but somehow she looked more formidable than she had in designer silk. "I heard everything," she said, her voice steady despite the redness around her eyes. "Every word." Ryan straightened, immediately shifting into charm mode. "Olivia, darling, thank God you're safe. I've been worried sick." "Save it." She held up the phone. "I've already sent copies of everything to my father, and to our family attorney." The color drained from Ryan's face. "You did what?" "While you were downstairs trying to manipulate your mother, again, I was making sure the truth couldn't be buried. Again." She stepped fully into the hallway, keeping her distance from Ryan. "It's over." "Olivia, you don't understand," Ryan began, desperation edging his voice. "Those investments are completely legitimate. If you'd just let me explain the strategy. The strategy of gradually transferring foundation funds through a series of shell companies until they land in your personal offshore account." Olivia's laugh was cold. "That strategy?" Ryan went very still. "Who else have you told?" The question carried a weight that made my skin prickle. Not a denial, not an explanation, just a calculation of damage control. "My father is on his way here now," Olivia replied. "He should arrive within the hour, and he's bringing company, the foundation's forensic accountant, and our family attorney." I watched my son's face as the reality of his situation sank in. The mask of charm and confidence crumbled, revealing something harder and more desperate beneath. "Mom," he said, turning to me with pleading eyes, "you can't let this happen. Those documents in the envelope, if they come out now, if they're connected to me." "Then what, Ryan?" I asked quietly. "The truth about your father becomes public? The truth about what you've become follows?" He stared at me, this stranger wearing my son's face. "You'd really do that? Destroy your own son?" I felt a profound sadness settle over me. "No, Ryan, you've done that yourself. I'm just finally refusing to help you hide the wreckage." In the terrible silence that followed, we heard the sound of tires on gravel, a car pulling into my driveway. "That'll be Daddy," Olivia said, her society accent more pronounced now, armor against what was to come. Always earlier than expected, Ryan looked from Olivia to me, to the stairs behind us, calculating, always calculating. "Whatever you're thinking," I said softly, "don't make it worse than it already is." For a moment, I glimpsed something in his eyes. Not remorse, exactly, but perhaps recognition. Recognition of a crossroads, of a final chance to choose a different path than his father's. Then the doorbell rang, and the moment passed like a shadow over water. Charles Cabot was nothing like I'd imagined from Ryan's descriptions of Boston blue blood and old money privilege. The man who stood in my modest living room wore rumpled khakis and a worn Barber jacket, his silver hair uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed from what I suspected was a sleepless night, worrying about his daughter. "Martha Sullivan?" He extended his hand. "Charles Cabot. I apologize for the intrusion." I shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of sailing and gardening rather than the soft grip of idle wealth. "Not an intrusion at all, Mr. Cabot. Under the circumstances? Please, call me Charles." His gaze shifted to his daughter, who stood near the fireplace in her borrowed clothes, the envelope clutched to her chest. "Olivia, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Daddy." Her voice small, girlish, a daughter seeking her father's protection. Ryan stood apart from us all, leaning against the wall near the entrance, his posture deceptively casual, though I could see the tension in every line of his body. He looked like a cornered animal assessing its options. Behind Charles came two more men, one carrying a leather briefcase, the other a laptop bag. The family attorney and the forensic accountant, I presumed, though Charles didn't bother to introduce them. Their presence was statement enough. "Where is it?" Charles asked Olivia, his voice gentle but firm. She handed him Ryan's phone and the manila envelope. "Everything's here. What I found last night, and what Martha has kept for 30 years. Charles took them without opening either, passing them to the man with the briefcase. "Martin will review these. In the meantime, I think we all need to have a frank conversation." "Mr. Cabot," Ryan began, pushing himself off the wall with a winning smile. "I understand how this might look, but if you'll allow me 5 minutes to explain the investment strategy—" "Not now, Ryan." Charles didn't even look at him, addressing me instead. "Mrs. Sullivan, is there somewhere private we could speak? Just the two of us for a moment?" I nodded, somewhat surprised. "The garden, perhaps. It's quite pleasant this time of morning." As we stepped outside, I was acutely aware of leaving Ryan and Olivia with the two professionals who were already examining the evidence of decades of deception. Part of me wanted to stay, to protect Ryan even now, but another part, the part that had finally awakened after 30 years of willful slumber, knew this was necessary. Charles and I walked in silence to the stone bench among my roses. The morning had warmed, promising a beautiful spring day, incongruously lovely given the circumstances. "I'm sorry we're meeting like this," I said as we sat. I had hoped to be at the wedding. Charles sighed heavily. You should have been. When Olivia told me Ryan didn't want you there, I should have questioned it more deeply. Should have seen it as the red flag it was. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I? He looked at me directly. A man who excludes his mother from his wedding. What does that say about his character? About his capacity for gratitude, for honor? He shook his head. I ignored my instincts because Olivia seemed happy. Because Ryan was charming and ambitious, and said all the right things. I understood then why Charles had wanted to speak with me privately. Not to accuse or interrogate, but to share the particular burden of parental guilt. The knowledge that we had, in our different ways, enabled Ryan's deception. How much do you know? I asked. About what Ryan was doing with your foundation's money? Enough. His face darkened. Olivia called me at 5 this morning, hysterical. Sent me screenshots from Ryan's phone. Transactions, emails, account numbers. It's extensive. Sophisticated. He's been laying the groundwork since before they were even engaged. The deliberate, calculated nature of it struck me like a physical blow. Not opportunism, not a mistake, but a long-term strategy. My son had pursued Olivia not for love, but for access to her family's fortune. I didn't know, I whispered. I suspected he wasn't the man I raised him to be, but this, of course you didn't know. Charles's voice was surprisingly kind. We see what we want to see in our children. We make excuses. We look away from evidence that would break our hearts. I thought of the cedar chest in my attic, of documents hidden for decades, of suspicions buried beneath layers of maternal protection. Sometimes we know more than we admit, even to ourselves, I said softly. Charles nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. Olivia mentioned documents. Something about Ryan's father? Yes. I turned slightly to face him directly. Daniel, my ex-husband, was involved in financial fraud similar to what Ryan appears to be doing. He disappeared when Ryan was 3, after stealing from his clients and emptying our accounts. I see. Charles absorbed this without visible judgment. And the documents? Evidence I found after the FBI investigation closed. Papers that implicated Daniel and some of his associates. I kept them hidden all these years. To protect Ryan? Initially, yes. I was afraid he might face suspicion simply for being Daniel's son. I looked down at my gardener's hands, worn and veined. Later, I kept them as insurance against Daniel's return. And finally, I trailed off, the truth too painful to articulate. Finally, you kept them because you began to suspect Ryan might be following his father's path. Charles finished for me. I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. We all fail our children in different ways, Martha, he said after a moment. I gave Olivia everything except the tools to recognize predators disguised as princes. You protected Ryan from everything except his own worst instincts. A bitter laugh escaped me. Quite a pair of parents we make. Indeed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before fading. The question now is what happens next? What are your intentions? Regarding Ryan? Charles sighed deeply. The foundation serves thousands of people, Martha. Children with cancer, veterans with PTSD. If Ryan has been diverting funds meant for them, he trailed off, then continued more firmly. I have a fiduciary and moral obligation to pursue this legally, to recover whatever has been taken. I understand, I said, though my heart constricted at the implications. Prison, scandal, the final, irrevocable connection between Ryan and his fugitive father. But, Charles continued, how we proceed, the public nature of it, the potential for leniency in exchange for cooperation, that remains to be determined. He looked at me directly. What do you want, Martha? The question stunned me. No one had asked what I wanted in so long, decades perhaps. I had defined myself entirely by Ryan's needs, Ryan's future, Ryan's protection. I began, then stopped, uncertain. What did I want? To turn back time? To erase Ryan's choices? To pretend none of this was happening? No, those were old instincts, the reflexes of a mother who had protected too much and demanded too little. I want him to face consequences, I said finally, my voice stronger. Not to punish him, but because without consequences, there can be no real change, no redemption. Charles nodded slowly. And the documents about his father? Are you prepared for those to become public as well? Was I? The question hung between us as I considered the implications. The community where I'd lived for 40 years would learn that I had harbored evidence in a federal case. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, all would see the web of deception I'd helped weave. Yet alongside that fear came another feeling, one I barely recognized, relief. The prospect of living without secrets, without the constant vigilance required to maintain a false narrative, felt suddenly like freedom. Yes, I said, surprised by my own certainty. I'm tired of protecting lies, even my own. Charles reached over and briefly covered my hand with his, a gesture of solidarity from one parent to another. Then let's go back inside, he said, standing. It's time for truth to have its day. As we walked back toward the house, I noticed Ryan watching us through the window, his expression unreadable at this distance. My son, my beautiful, flawed, corrupted son. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the child I had protected, nor as the monster Olivia feared, but as a man standing at a crossroads of his own making. What path he would choose in the coming hours would determine not just his future, but the final chapter of our shared story. And for once, I would not be writing that chapter for him. The atmosphere in my living room had shifted during our absence. Ryan sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, his wedding suit rumpled, his face a mask of controlled panic. The accountant and attorney had spread papers across my coffee table, printouts from Ryan's phone, alongside the yellowed documents from my envelope. The physical evidence of 2 generations of fraud laid bare on the surface, where I usually place tea and mystery novels. Olivia stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a detachment that seemed both defensive and necessary. When she glanced at her father and me entering, her expression softened briefly, before hardening again as her gaze moved to Ryan. "Mr. Sullivan," the attorney, Martin, said as we entered, "perhaps you'd like to explain these offshore accounts in the Caymans and Singapore?" Ryan's eyes darted to me, then to Charles, seeking an ally, finding none. "Those are perfectly legitimate investment vehicles," he began, his voice sliding into the smooth, confident tone I'd heard him use countless times. "Tax efficiency is a standard practice in wealth management." "And the systematic transfers from the Cabot Family Foundation?" Martin pressed. "The circular transactions through shell companies that ultimately terminate in your personal accounts? Is that also standard practice?" "You're misinterpreting the flow of funds," Ryan insisted. "If you understood the broader strategy—" "I understand perfectly," the accountant interrupted, looking up from his laptop. "I've spent 20 years investigating financial fraud. This," he gestured to the screen, "is textbook, almost elegant in its construction, but fraud nonetheless." Ryan's confident facade cracked slightly. "This is absurd. You can't possibly have reviewed everything in 30 minutes. "We don't need to review everything," Martin replied coolly. "The pattern is clear from even a cursory examination. And the similarities to your father's methods," he tapped the yellow documents, "are rather striking." At the mention of his father, Ryan flinched visibly. His eyes found mine, accusatory. "You showed them everything?" "Yes," I said simply. "Why?" The raw betrayal in his voice nearly broke my resolve. "Why now, after all these years of protection?" I moved to sit across from him, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. "Because protection without accountability isn't love, Ryan. It's complicity." "How poetic," he sneered, Daniel's expression flashing across his features. 30 years of silence, and now suddenly you're a paragon of moral clarity." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm a mother who failed her son by enabling his worst instincts instead of challenging them. I'm trying to rectify that mistake, even at this late hour." Ryan laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "By destroying me? By handing over evidence that will send me to prison? That's your idea of maternal love?" "Ryan," Charles interrupted, his voice carrying the natural authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "This posturing isn't helping your situation. The evidence is damning. The question now is how we proceed." Ryan's attention snapped to his father-in-law, calculation replacing defiance. "What do you mean, how we proceed?" Charles settled into an armchair, every inch the CEO, despite his rumpled appearance. "We have several options, none of them pleasant, but some less catastrophic than others." "I'm listening," Ryan said cautiously. "Option 1. We contact the FBI immediately. The Foundation presses charges for wire fraud, embezzlement, and possibly RICO violations. Your mother's documents about Daniel become part of the evidence. You face federal prosecution with a potential sentence of 20 to 30 years. Ryan paled, but remained silent. "Option 2, Charles continued. You cooperate fully. Return every penny taken from the Foundation. Provide complete transparency about all accounts, all transactions. Sign a confession and accept a plea deal that will likely still include prison time, but substantially less." "And option 3? Ryan asked, the lawyer in him still seeking alternatives. Charles leaned forward. "There is no option 3, son. Not this time. The only variables here are how long you serve and how much damage is done to everyone involved in the process." The finality in Charles's tone seemed to land heavily on Ryan. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he faced a situation he couldn't charm, manipulate, or explain his way out of. "If I cooperate," he said slowly, "what happens to the public aspect, the publicity?" Ah, I thought, there it was, Ryan's true concern. Not the moral implications, not the betrayal of trust, but the damage to his carefully constructed public image. "We would handle it as discreetly as possible," Charles replied, "for Olivia's sake and for the Foundation's. A quiet resolution, a private plea agreement. You would need to resign from your firm, of course, and surrender your securities licenses." "My career would be over," Ryan said flatly. "Yes," Charles agreed without sympathy, "but you would have a future beyond prison, a chance to rebuild something honest." Ryan fell silent, his gaze moving from the evidence on the table to Olivia, still standing apart from us all. "And what about us?" he asked her. "Our marriage?" Olivia's laugh was soft and incredulous. "Are you serious? You married me to steal from my family's foundation. Money meant for sick children and abuse victims. There is no us, Ryan. There never was." The pain that flashed across my son's face looked genuine, which surprised me. Had he developed real feelings for Olivia despite his initial mercenary intentions? Or was he simply mourning the loss of his carefully constructed future? I did care for you, he said quietly. That wasn't fake. Save it, Olivia replied, turning away. Ryan's shoulders slumped slightly. He looked suddenly younger, almost boyish in his defeat. I was reminded painfully of the day Daniel left, how Ryan had sat on the front steps for hours, waiting for a father who would never return. What would you do? He asked unexpectedly, looking directly at me. If you were in my position? The question caught me off guard. After decades of Ryan dismissing my advice, my experience, my perspective, he was actually asking what I would do. I would choose the path with truth at its center, I said carefully. Not because it's easy, but because living with lies is ultimately more painful than facing consequences, says the woman who hid evidence for 30 years, he replied. But the barb lacked its earlier venom. Yes, I acknowledged. And look what that deception has cost us both. Ryan fell silent again, his eyes moving to the documents spread across the table. I could almost see him calculating odds, weighing options, searching for an escape route that simply didn't exist. Finally, he looked up at Charles. If I agree to full cooperation, full restitution, can I have some time? A few days before we formalize anything? Charles exchanged glances with his attorney. Time for what, exactly? To get my affairs in order. To prepare. Ryan's voice was carefully neutral. 72 hours. That's all I'm asking. The implication hung unspoken in the air. Time to run. Time to disappear. Time to follow his father's path. One final, irrevocable step. No, I said firmly, before Charles could respond. Absolutely not. Ryan's eyes snapped to mine, startled by my vehemence. You will not do what he did, I continued, leaning forward to meet his gaze directly. You will not disappear, leaving others to clean up your mess. You will not spend your life looking over your shoulder, cutting yourself off from everyone who ever loved you. You will not become him, Ryan. I won't allow it. It's not your decision, he said. But I heard the uncertainty beneath his defiance. Perhaps not, I conceded. But for once in your life, I'm telling you the unvarnished truth. If you run, you will destroy whatever chance you have of redemption. Whatever fragment of the good man I raised that still exists inside you will wither and die. A tense silence filled the room. I could feel Charles and the others watching our exchange, but my focus remained entirely on my son, this brilliant, broken man who stood at the precipice of his father's path. I don't know how to face this, Ryan finally whispered, his voice so low I barely heard it. I don't know how to be disgraced. In that moment, I glimpsed the frightened child beneath the fraudster's mask, the boy who had spent his life running from the shame of abandonment, only to create a new shame of his own. You face it one day at a time, I said gently, and you don't face it alone. Ryan looked up, genuine surprise in his eyes. You'd stand by me? Even after all this? Even knowing what I've done? I'm your mother, I said simply. I won't enable you anymore. I won't make excuses for you, but I won't abandon you either. Something shifted in Ryan's expression. Not quite surrender, not quite relief, but perhaps the first tentative step toward acceptance. He turned to Charles, shoulders straightening slightly. No running, no delays. I'll cooperate fully, starting now. Charles nodded, the tension in his posture easing fractionally. A wise decision. As the attorney began outlining the immediate next steps, accounts to be frozen, statements to be signed, I caught Olivia watching Ryan with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Not forgiveness, certainly. Perhaps not even understanding, but recognition, at least, of the small act of courage it took for him to choose a harder path than his father had. For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope. Not that this would end well. That possibility had vanished the moment Ryan decided to follow his father's criminal blueprint, but that it might end honestly, with dignity and accountability replacing deception and evasion. It wasn't much, but after 30 years of lies, it was something to build upon, something true. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of legal documents, hushed phone calls, and a revolving door of financial experts and attorneys. My modest colonial home, usually so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, became command central for the controlled implosion of my son's fraudulent empire. Ryan remained surprisingly compliant throughout the process. He signed whatever was placed before him, provided passwords to accounts scattered across 3 continents, and answered questions with a detached precision that reminded me, painfully, of how brilliant he truly was. Brilliance now documented in service of unraveling his own crimes. Olivia stayed with me, sleeping in my guest room while the legal machinery ground forward. She had not spoken directly to Ryan since that first morning, communicating through her father or the attorneys when necessary. The borrowed clothes became a second skin as she refused to return to the Boston apartment she had shared with Ryan for the past year, or to contact her mother who, according to a tense phone call I overheard, was more concerned with social embarrassment than her daughter's well-being. On the evening of the second day, I found her sitting alone in my garden, staring at the roses I had been pruning when Ryan's fateful call came. "May I join you?" I asked, 2 mugs of tea in hand. She nodded, making room on the stone bench. The evening was cool but pleasant. the garden buzzing with the drowsy activity of bees making their final rounds before sunset. "How are you holding up?" I asked, passing her a mug. Olivia accepted it with a small smile. "Shouldn't I be asking you that? He's your son. And he was your husband, however briefly." She stared into her tea. 26 hours. That's how long I was married before I discovered the truth. Not even long enough to change my name on any documents. "Small mercies," I murmured. "I keep thinking about the signs I missed," she continued. "The questions about the foundation that seemed like genuine interest. The subtle suggestions about investment strategies that I passed along to Daddy. The way he charmed every board member individually." She shook her head. "I was a perfect access point. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I?" She looked at me directly. There were moments, brief, easily dismissed, when I caught something calculating in his eyes, when his charm seemed rehearsed rather than natural, but I ignored them because he fit so perfectly into the future I'd imagined. I recognized the particular pain in her voice, the agony of realizing you've been willfully blind to what was right in front of you. "We believe what we need to believe," I said gently. "It's a very human failing." Olivia studied me over the rim of her mug. "How did you do it? Raise him alone after his father left?" The question took me by surprise. No one had ever really asked about that time. The brutal years of working multiple jobs, of explanations to a confused child, of night classes and secondhand clothes and dinners cobbled together from whatever was on sale that week. "One day at a time," I replied. "Some days better than others. Most days just putting one foot in front of the other and hoping I wasn't making irreparable mistakes." I sipped my tea, memories surfacing. The irony is that everything I did, every sacrifice, every protection, every white lie about his father was meant to spare him pain, to give him advantages I never had. And instead, I may have laid the groundwork for what he became, I finished, by shielding him from consequences, by hiding uncomfortable truths, by allowing him to believe his own carefully constructed narratives. We sat in silence for a moment, two women connected by the same man, equally blindsided by who he truly was. "The foundation will recover most of the money," Olivia said finally. "Daddy's team has already located about 80% of it. The rest," she shrugged, "the rest is the cost of my poor judgment." "Ryan will make restitution," I said. "Even if it takes years, even if it's after prison." Olivia nodded, though her expression suggested skepticism. "Your documents about his father have been tremendously helpful, you know. They've allowed the forensic team to identify patterns they might have missed otherwise." "Small comfort," I said ruefully. "Not small at all," she countered. "If you hadn't kept those papers, if you hadn't made the difficult choice to share them now, who knows how much more damage Ryan might have done, how many more people he might have hurt." Her perspective startled me. I had viewed my decision to reveal Daniel's documents as a failure, the final collapse of my decades-long effort to protect Ryan. But Olivia saw it as something else entirely, an act of courage that prevented further harm. "I never wanted to be the reason my son went to prison," I admitted. "You're not," she said firmly. "His choices are the reason, his actions, not yours." A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lighten slightly. "Not disappear. Nothing could eliminate the grief of watching your child face consequences of this magnitude, but shift, becoming somehow more bearable." "What will you do now?" I asked her. "After all this is resolved?" Olivia looked out across the garden, considering. "Travel, maybe. Somewhere far from Boston society and expectations. Then perhaps law school." A small, determined smile crossed her lips. "I think I'd like to specialize in financial crimes, actually. Use this experience for something constructive. You'll be excellent at it," I said, meaning it. In just 2 days, I'd seen the steel beneath Olivia's socialite exterior. An intelligence and resilience her mother-in-law of 26 hours appreciated far more than her son ever had. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do when—" She trailed off, unable to directly reference Ryan's impending incarceration. I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead. My life for 30 years had revolved around Ryan, his needs, his future, his protection. Even now, with his crimes exposed and his future drastically altered, my instinct was to focus entirely on him, on prison visits and commissary accounts and legal appeals. But as I sat in my garden with this young woman who had found unexpected strength in catastrophe, I realized I had a choice to make. I could continue defining myself solely as Ryan's mother, his protector, his lifeline, or I could, even at 68, begin to rediscover who Martha Sullivan might be beyond those roles. "I think," I said slowly, "I might finally write that book about early American female poets I've been researching for 20 years. The manuscript pages are still in a box in my attic, gathering dust alongside other abandoned dreams." "I'd read that book," Olivia said, and again I heard the genuine interest beneath her polite response. "And I'll be here for Ryan, of course," I continued, "but not to the exclusion of everything else. Not anymore." The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the garden. Tomorrow would bring more legal meetings, more unraveling of Ryan's schemes, more painful revelations. But tonight, in this quiet moment between storms, I allowed myself to imagine a future where truth, however painful, provided a foundation more solid than any deception ever could. "Thank you," Olivia said unexpectedly. For what? For showing me what real courage looks like. She set her empty mug on the bench between us. It would have been so much easier for you to keep hiding those documents, to help Ryan cover his tracks, to choose your son over justice. It wasn't courage, I demurred. Just exhaustion with lies. Sometimes they're the same thing, she replied wisely. As darkness fell around us, I considered her words. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps courage sometimes looks like simply laying down the burdens you've carried too long. The secrets, the justifications, the protective lies. Perhaps truth, in the end, is not just about moral rectitude, but about the profound relief of no longer having to remember which version of reality you're supposed to maintain. In the gathering twilight, I made a silent promise to myself. No more protective deception. No more willful blindness. No more sacrificing truth on the altar of comfort. Whatever came next, for Ryan, for me, for the fractured family we had become, would be faced in the clarifying light of honesty. It was, I realized, the only gift I had left to give my son. And perhaps, after all these years, the only one he truly needed. 6 months passed. The maple outside my kitchen window cycled through spring green to summer fullness to autumn flame. Nature's reliable rhythm continuing despite the seismic shifts in my personal landscape. Ryan had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, a remarkable reduction from the potential 30 years, thanks to his cooperation and Charles Cabot's behind-the-scenes influence. Not mercy exactly, but pragmatism. Full restitution was more likely if Ryan maintained some hope for a future after incarceration. I stood at my kitchen sink, washing the last breakfast dishes and watching golden leaves spiral down onto my garden path. Today was visiting day. In 2 hours, I would make the 90-minute drive to the minimum security facility where Ryan was serving his time, carrying permitted magazines and family photos in a clear plastic bag. My phone rang. The landline I still maintained despite everyone's insistence that it was obsolete. Only a handful of people had the number now. Hello? Martha? It's Charles Cabot. In the months since Ryan's sentencing, Charles and I had developed an unexpected friendship. Not close exactly, but a connection forged in the crucible of shared pain and responsibility. Charles, how are you? Well enough. Just checking if we're still on for tonight? I smiled despite myself. The faculty reception? Yes, though I still think you're overestimating my contribution. Hardly, he replied. The Boston University English Department is thrilled to have you guest lecture on Emily Dickinson and her contemporaries. Your research is apparently groundbreaking. Their word, not mine. My cheeks warmed at the praise. 3 months ago, on a whim born of our garden conversation, I had submitted my long-abandoned manuscript to a former colleague who had recently become department chair. To my astonishment, she had not only read it, but championed it, resulting in both a publishing contract and an invitation to teach a special seminar in the spring. Will Olivia be there? I asked, changing the subject. Briefly, she has an evening class at Harvard Law, but wanted to stop by to support you. Pride swelled in my chest at the mention of Olivia. After spending 2 weeks in my guest room, she had moved to Cambridge to begin an accelerated law program, determined to transform her ordeal into purpose. We spoke weekly, our unlikely friendship, one of the few positive outcomes of the whole painful episode. Give her my love. I'll see you both tonight, after my visit with Ryan. We said our goodbyes, and I returned to watching the falling leaves, thinking about cycles, patterns, and the possibility of breaking them. The visiting room at Devon's Federal Medical Center was designed to minimize the institutional feel. Soft chairs arranged in conversational groupings, muted colors, even some potted plants struggling valiantly under fluorescent lighting. Still, there was no disguising what it was, a carefully monitored space where inmates could briefly pretend they were part of the outside world. Ryan was already seated when I arrived, wearing the standard khaki uniform that still looked jarringly wrong on him. 6 months of prison life had changed him physically. He was leaner, his formerly manicured hands now slightly rough, his perfect haircut grown out into something more natural. But it was the change in his eyes that struck me most. The constant calculation, the charm that functioned like a shield, had been replaced by something more direct, more present. Whether this represented genuine transformation or simply adaptation to an environment where his old manipulations held less power, I couldn't yet tell. Mom, he said, standing to embrace me briefly before a guard's pointed look reminded him of contact limitations. You look well, I said, taking the seat across from him, and he did, in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Less polished, but somehow more substantial. The food's terrible, and the company's worse, but otherwise I'm managing. His smile was wry, but not bitter. How was the drive up? Beautiful. The foliage is at its peak. We exchanged these pleasantries like actors warming up before the real performance. 6 months of weekly visits had established a pattern. Casual conversation first, then business matters, and finally, if we were both feeling brave, the harder truths that still lay between us. I signed the final restitution agreement yesterday, Ryan said, moving to the business portion. My lawyer says it's as good a deal as I could hope for. That's good news. It means I'll be paying the foundation back for approximately the rest of my natural life. He shrugged, but at least I'll sleep better. I studied him, searching for signs of the old Ryan, the glib charm that masked deeper calculation. But there was a straightforwardness to him now that seemed genuine, if hard-won. "Are you? Sleeping better?" He considered the question seriously. "Some nights, the ones where I can look at myself honestly and still find something worth salvaging. And the other nights? Those are harder." His eyes met mine directly. "The nights when I remember who I was, what I did, the people I hurt." A pause, you included. I reached across the table, stopping just short of taking his hand. "I made my own choices, Ryan. Choices that contributed to where we both ended up." He nodded, acknowledging this shared responsibility without using it as an excuse. "Progress," I thought. "Slow, but real." "How's Olivia?" he asked, as he did every visit. "Starting her second semester at Harvard Law. Focused, determined." "Good." A genuine smile crossed his face. "She'll make an excellent attorney. She's specializing in white-collar crime and victim advocacy." Ryan winced slightly, then laughed. "Of course she is. Turning pain into purpose. Something we're all trying to do, I think." He studied me with new interest. "Speaking of which, Charles mentioned you're teaching next semester and publishing your research?" "Yes." I couldn't keep the excitement from my voice. "A special seminar on women poets of early America, and the book comes out in February." "That's fantastic, Mom." The pride in his voice sounded genuine. "You've waited too long to share your work. Better late than never, it seems." A comfortable silence fell between us. Through the large windows, I could see maple trees similar to mine, their leaves creating a kaleidoscope of amber and crimson against the blue October sky. "I found some of Dad's old letters," Ryan said suddenly. "When the FBI was clearing out my apartment, they were in a file I kept in my home safe." My breath caught. "Letters? From when?" "Recent ones. We've been in contact for years." He watched my reaction carefully. "Since I was in business school." Though I had suspected something like this, the confirmation still felt like a blow. "I see." He reached out first, found me through social media. Ryan's voice was steady, factual. "He was in Uruguay by then. New name, new life, new family. And you never told me. I wanted something that was mine alone, something you couldn't protect me from or manage." He paused, "and I wanted to understand him, to know the man behind the myth you and I had created in his absence." I absorbed this, feeling the sting, but understanding it too. "And did you understand him?" "Eventually." Ryan's eyes turned distant. He wasn't the villain I'd imagined as a child, nor the hero I created later, just a man who made terrible choices and spent his life running from them. A self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "Sound familiar?" "You're not him, Ryan," I said firmly. "You made different choices in the end, because I had something he didn't," Ryan replied. "Someone who finally held me accountable instead of making excuses. Someone who loved me enough to let me face consequences." The simple truth of his words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. All those years of protection, of enabling, of smoothing his path, and what he had needed most was the one thing I had been too afraid to give him. Accountability born of genuine love. "What happened to him?" I asked. "To Daniel? Died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer." Ryan's expression was complex. Grief mingled with relief, anger with acceptance. "He never found peace, Mom. Never stopped looking over his shoulder, never formed real connections. His whole life was a performance, like yours was becoming," I thought but didn't say. The parallel hung unspoken between us. "I have something for you," Ryan said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this in my therapy group last week. The counselor suggested I share it with you when I was ready." He handed it across the table, a simple sheet torn from a notebook, covered in Ryan's distinctive handwriting. At the top, a title, "Truths I Am Learning to Accept." "You don't have to read it now," he said quickly. "It's just things I'm trying to understand. About myself, about us." I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my purse. "Thank you. I'll read it when I get home." Our time was nearly up. Around us, other families were saying their goodbyes, exchanging last hugs and promises to return next week. "The fall seminar at the university," Ryan said as we stood. "Will you tell me about it on your next visit? What you're teaching? Who your students are?" "Of course," I replied, touched by his interest in this new chapter of my life, a chapter separate from him, from his needs, from our shared past. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said softly, "for becoming more than just my mother, for finding your voice again." The role reversal, my son expressing pride in me rather than the other way around, felt strange, but not unwelcome. Perhaps this too was part of our healing, this recalibration of a relationship that had been unbalanced for too long. As I drove away from Devon's, the late afternoon sun transformed ordinary trees into blazing sculptures of gold and crimson. I thought about cycles broken and renewed, about truth's power to wound and to heal, about how endings sometimes contain the seeds of unexpected beginnings. Before I continue, don't forget to join our group, where you'll have access to exclusive stories, without ads directly on your cell phone, and you don't even need internet to watch. Just go to the first pinned comment. At a rest stop halfway home, I finally unfolded Ryan's letter and read his painfully honest reflections, acknowledgments of harm done, recognition of patterns inherited and chosen, and in the final paragraph, a commitment that brought fresh tears to my eyes. I am learning that redemption isn't found in being forgiven or forgotten, but in the daily choice to live honestly, even when it's harder. My father never understood this. Thanks to you, I have a chance to. That evening, as I stood in Boston University's faculty lounge with Charles beside me and Olivia, across the room, deep in conversation with a constitutional law professor, I felt a sense of rightness that had eluded me for decades. Not happiness exactly. Too much had been lost. Too much damage done for simple happiness. But something more sustainable. The quiet satisfaction of living in truth, however difficult, rather than in comfortable deception. My son was in prison. My manuscript was being published. I was teaching again. Olivia was finding her path forward. All of us irrevocably changed by choices made and truths revealed. None of it was what I would have chosen or predicted a year ago. Standing in my garden, with pruning shears in hand, preparing for a wedding I wouldn't attend. Yet as I looked around at this new life taking shape from the ashes of the old, I recognized that sometimes the most painful truths create the most authentic beginnings. And beginnings, unlike endings, contain infinite possibility. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional family stories that will touch your heart. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue sharing these powerful stories with our community. 1 year later, the auditorium at Boston University hummed with anticipation. Faculty members in academic regalia mingled with students and guests, their conversations creating a gentle murmur that filled the space. At the podium, the Dean of Arts and Sciences adjusted her microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome you to this special event celebrating the publication of Voices Unsilenced, America's Forgotten Female Poets, 1790-1850, by our own distinguished visiting professor, Dr. Martha Sullivan. Seated in the front row, I smoothed my new dress, a deep burgundy that Olivia had insisted brought out the warmth in my complexion, and tried to calm my racing heart. At 69, I was experiencing a series of firsts that most people encountered decades earlier. First book publication, first university lecture series, first public reading of my work. Charles Cabot sat to my right, politely applauding. Over the past year, our friendship had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. Not romance exactly, but a companionship built on mutual respect and shared experience. We attended symphony performances together, debated literature over dinner, and occasionally sailed on his modest boat along the New Hampshire coastline. A relationship without pretense or performance, refreshing for us both after lives spent maintaining appearances. Olivia sat on my left, now in her second year at Harvard Law and thriving. Her experience had transformed her from a society daughter into a fierce advocate for financial transparency and victim protection. She had testified before a congressional committee on strengthening oversight of private foundations, her composed eloquence making headlines, and her father burst with pride. As I approached the podium, my gaze caught on an empty seat in the back row, reserved but unoccupied. Ryan had been granted a day pass to attend, but had called this morning to say transportation issues would prevent his arrival. Disappointment mingled with understanding. The logistics of moving between worlds was complicated, both practically and emotionally. Thank you all for coming, I began, placing my reading glasses on my nose and opening my book to the marked page. This project has been 30 years in the making, though I didn't realize until recently that the delay itself would become part of the story. As I read selected passages, analyses of poems by women whose voices had been marginalized, forgotten, or deliberately obscured, I felt a sense of completion. Not just for the academic work finally finding its audience, but for my own voice, so long subordinated to others' needs and narratives. Halfway through the reading, movement at the back of the auditorium caught my eye. The door had opened quietly, and a figure slipped into the reserved seat. Ryan, in a suit and tie, his hair now cut short in a practical prison style, nodded slightly when our eyes met. My voice faltered momentarily before continuing, stronger now, with the knowledge that my son, the real one, not the illusion I had protected for so long, was witnessing this moment of reclamation. After the reading, during the reception, Ryan approached cautiously, aware of the curious glances from those who recognized him from news coverage of his case. "You made it," I said, embracing him briefly. "Barely. The transport was delayed." He gestured around at the crowded reception. "This is amazing, Mom. You were amazing. Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't easy to arrange." He shrugged. "My counselor thought it was important. Part of recognizing the full personhood of parents, seeing you as more than just extensions of my needs and expectations." I laughed softly. "Prison therapy seems to be working wonders for your insight. It's either that or stare at the wall for 7 years. His smile was wry but not bitter. "Turns out introspection is the only luxury available inside." Charles approached, offering his hand to Ryan. Their relationship was cordial but distant, respect without warmth, civility without connection. "The book is selling well," Charles informed him. "Pre-orders exceeded the publisher's expectations. There's talk of a second printing already." "I'm not surprised," Ryan replied. "Mom's research was always exceptional. I just never took the time to notice." The simple acknowledgement, The recognition of his past self-absorption spoke volumes about his ongoing journey toward authenticity. Olivia joined our small circle, her professional confidence evident in her posture and attire. Though she and Ryan had finalized their divorce through proxy signatures and attorney meetings, this was their first face-to-face encounter since that morning in my kitchen. "Congratulations, Martha," she said, kissing my cheek before turning to Ryan with a polite nod. "Ryan, you look well, Olivia," he replied, maintaining a respectful distance. "I hear you're at the top of your class." "Second, actually, but I'm coming for that top spot next semester." A ghost of a smile crossed Ryan's face. I never doubted it. The awkward tension between them was palpable, but not hostile. Two people connected by painful history, but now moving along separate paths. "I should circulate," Olivia said after a moment. "The dean wanted to introduce me to someone from the Justice Department's Financial Crimes Division." She squeezed my hand. "Dinner next week is planned?" "Looking forward to it," I confirmed. As she moved away, Ryan watched her go with a complicated expression, regret mixed with acceptance. "She's going to be formidable," he observed. "She already is," Charles replied, a father's pride evident. A guard approached discreetly, tapping his watch. Ryan's time was limited. "I have to go soon," he said, "but I wanted to give you something first." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "It's not much," he explained as I unwrapped it. "Resources are limited inside." Inside was a wooden bookmark, hand-carved with delicate patterns of leaves and vines. "I made it in the woodworking program," Ryan said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Thought you might use it for your book tour." I ran my finger over the intricate carving, touched by the hours of patient work represented in this small object. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "Thank you." "There's an inscription on the back," he added. I turned it over to find small, carefully burned letters. "To Martha Sullivan, scholar, writer, mother, all three deserving of honor." The simple acknowledgement of my multifaceted identity, not just as his mother but as a person with my own value and purpose, felt like the most profound gift Ryan had ever given me. "I have something for you too," I said, reaching into my purse. "Your counselor approved it." I handed him a copy of my book. On the title page, I had written, "To Ryan, may you find your authentic voice as I have finally found mine. With love that demands truth, Mom." He traced the inscription with his finger, then tucked the book carefully inside his jacket. "One day at a time," he said quietly, our shared mantra for this new reality. "One day at a time," I echoed. As the guard led Ryan away, Charles placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You've raised a remarkable son," he said, surprising me. "A deeply flawed one," I corrected gently. "As are we all," Charles replied. "The difference is, he's finally facing his flaws rather than hiding them beneath charm and deception." He squeezed my shoulder lightly, rather like his mother. I watched Ryan's retreating back, straight, dignified, carrying my book close to his heart. Not a happy ending, certainly, but perhaps the beginning of something more valuable, a life built on honesty rather than illusion. Later that evening, as guests departed and the excitement of the day began to fade, I found myself alone in the university garden. The October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, a reminder that even endings can be beautiful in their own way. My phone chimed with a text message from Ryan, sent through the monitored prison system. "Proud of you, Mom, for everything you are beyond being my mother. Starting your book tonight." I smiled at the screen, this small electronic window into my son's continuing journey. Then I turned it off and tucked it away, choosing instead to simply be present in this moment, this unexpectedly sweet season of my life that had bloomed from the ashes of painful truth. The moon rose above the campus buildings, casting silver light across the garden path. I thought of all the roads not taken, the years spent in service to others' narratives, the truths deferred in the name of protection and love. Yet here I was, in the autumn of my life, experiencing a spring I never expected. New growth, new purpose, new connections formed in the fertile soil of authentic living. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson of this difficult year, that truth, however painful, creates possibilities that deception never can. That it's never too late to begin again, to reclaim your voice, to insist on living in the clarifying light of what is real rather than what is comfortable. I gathered my coat around me and began the walk back to the faculty parking lot, where Charles waited to drive me home. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more complex emotions, more delicate navigation of this new landscape. But tonight, under the October moon, surrounded by the evidence of a life reclaimed, rather than merely survived, I felt something approaching peace. Not the peace of perfect resolution. Life is too complex for such neat endings, but the deeper peace that comes from finally living in accordance with your truest self, whatever the cost. And in the end, isn't that the only peace worth having? If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional family stories that will touch your heart. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue sharing these powerful stories with our community.